Good evening. The time is 7:03 p.m. We are again in the Mount Vernon City Council chambers for the Westchester County Rent Guidelines Board public meeting. Chair, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. My name is Elsa. And I welcome the presence of the audience. Thank you for being here. And I have to remind you that this is a public meeting strictly for the purpose of hearing the tenants and owners representatives presentation, and the public is not allowed to participate. I will now take a roll call. Please respond if present. Evelyn Alicea Santiago, public member.
Present.
Natalie Felsenfeld, public
Present.
member. Natalie.
Present.
Kenneth J, owner representative. Sylvia Hamer, tenant representative.
Present.
Gregory Smith, public
Present.
representative.
Present.
Tamara Stewart, tenant representative.
Present.
And Robert Withers, owner representative.
Present.
Let the record show that we have quorum. Our next meeting will take place on Thursday, June 26th at 7 p.m. There's a little discussion about this, and our counsel, Peter Stecker, is going to explain what is going on. At the White Plains City Hall, when the tenants and the owners representatives will give the rebuttal, and it will be followed by the final vote. So with that said, I'm going to ask Mr. Stecker if he has any announcements.
Good evening, Chair. Thank you. So just first looking backwards, last Thursday was the first time that this board has been able to stream a meeting to YouTube since 2021, which helps with, openness of these meetings. It also provides an opportunity if any of the board or any member of the public wants to view the proceedings thus far in a video format. I know there were some issues with the audio last week. There's perfect audio on the YouTube recording, strangely enough. So with that being said, that's there. It's available through a link on our website. Anyone can ask me if they need it. Secondly, you alluded to that there is a potential scheduling issue with the vote meeting for next week. As everyone knows, we usually meet in February or earlier to try to set these dates and times, and it takes a lot of reaching out to the municipalities to try to square away some rooms for our use several months in advance. So there's really not much that can be done with what was raised, which is Mr. Robeson Smith is unable to attend the meeting due to a scheduling conflict, graduation. I think it's worthwhile for the board to talk about what, if anything, could be done to change, the time of the meeting. As everyone knows, there is a 9-member board that's supposed to be impaneled. Right now, there's 8 members. For anything to pass next Thursday, there would need to be 5 votes. So this board still has enough to meet a quorum, still has enough to get the 5 votes. It's just going to make consensus that much harder to get to. So if there is some way to accommodate Mr. Robeson Smith's schedule and, do something about the time of the meeting, it's probably worthwhile to discuss. I can certainly reach out to the city of White Plains, for instance, to see if there's a earlier time that this board could meet. But I will turn it to you, Chair, to see if you want to lead that discussion on anything that can be done.
Yeah, does anybody, anybody of the board members have, conflict with, having the meeting earlier? No. Evelyn? Evelyn?
I would have to arrange something, but I think
What about you? You can't? Oh, okay. So in that case, Peter, I suggest that we stick to the schedule.
Yeah, and that's, entirely at the purview of the board. These are the dates and times that the board already agreed to and that you have time for. So it's regrettable, but, it's just a situation we're in. Thanks.
Yeah,
Okay.
Madam Chair, just for the record, as you know, I just came on the board maybe a couple of days before the first meeting. And my grandson is graduating from White Plains High School at the county center. So my schedule was already locked in for for that graduation. He's the last of the grandchildren who's graduating. Okay, so it's at 7:30. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. We understand. Family first.
So Chair, I guess one other option would be seeing if White Plains is available on the Monday, but I'm not sure that they are available. The city's closed at this point, so I can't call them to see if Monday is available, but that's something you may want to discuss with the board if that's an opportunity that. Okay.
Yes, Ms. Stewart.
Are we looking at something in the neighborhood of like a half an hour or like 6:30 instead of 7 o'clock? But then sometime when it puts people roughly in that.
Well, if it was at 5, we have to be there by 6:30. If you were in White Plains and we had it at 5, I could still get to the county center in time, as long as we don't have a 3-hour meeting.
No, it's somewhere around 30 or 40 minutes.
5, 6, yeah, I could do that. 5 o'clock, I could do that, and still get there by 6:30.
But Mr. Finger is not available at that time. On that Thursday? Yes.
Yes.
It's not important. It's this 12.
No, the board member,
Oh, yeah, it's
the board member.
Mr.
Mr. Smith.
I'm not too talking about Tenants at.
Oh.
Please, absolutely.
Ms. Hamer, you have something to say? Okay. So I think,
I have to make some arrangements, but I'll make sure that happens.
so Peter, first of all, we have to find out if the place is available
Correct.
earlier.
I will call them first thing tomorrow and see if 5 o'clock works. I'm not sure if it will, but this board directs me to do that. I can certainly do that. And I think it's probably worthwhile to have a vote on that. And if it's available for 5 o'clock, to direct me to update the public notice and reissue it.
You want to call the vote?
Do you have a second on that, Chair?
Second.
Okay. Motion by Chair Rubin, seconded by Sylvia Hamer. Again, for me to explore whether 5 o'clock PM works to change the time for next week's meeting. And if so, to lock in that time and date and to reissue the public notice. Would you like me to call the roll, Chair?
Yes, please.
Chair Rubin,
Yes.
Evelyn Santiago,
Yes.
Gregory Robeson Smith,
Yes.
Natalie Felsenfeld,
Yes.
Robert Withers,
Yes.
Ken Finger,
Yeah.
Tamara Stewart,
Yes.
and Sylvia Hamer.
Yes.
Okay, so that passes by a vote of 8-0.
Thank you so very much. I'm very good with you.
And I will advise this board tomorrow immediately once I find out from the city of White Plains.
Thank you.
One note in this room, the video is tied to the audio. So if anyone's going to be speaking, I would ask them to turn on their microphone so that the audio gets picked up.
Well, are we ready to start with the presentations? We will start with the presentation of the tenant. Ms. Sylvia Hamer is going to do the presentation. You have 20 minutes. Mr. Stecker will be the timekeeper. And thank you for providing the presentation in hard copy and with big letters.
I couldn't see it otherwise.
Go ahead.
Good evening, Madam Chairwoman, board members, and members of the public. Tamara and I appreciate the opportunity to present a case in support of a low rent increase. Over the last few weeks, economic uncertainty has loomed large. The prospect of a substantial cut to benefits for hungry families and children seem all but inevitable. Millions of people are facing the prospect of losing their health insurance, and rising energy, insurance, and food costs are already impacting everyone. We are facing yet another unprecedented time. As you've heard during recent testimony to the board, those most significantly impacted are our county's most vulnerable populations: seniors, elderly, veterans, those with disabilities, children, and struggling families. Significant numbers of rent-stabilized tenants are on a fixed income, have a low income, or are living paycheck to paycheck. In Christine Carter's case, it takes 3 paychecks to afford her rent. According to the New York State Comptroller, Thomas DiNapoli's February 2024 report, The Housing Insecurity Crisis, finding and keeping adequate affordable housing has become next to impossible, and the burden of high housing costs forces trade-offs, food, medical care, etc., and has major implications for physical health, mental health, and economic opportunities. The report further states that approximately 3 million New Yorkers, 40% of households, are cost burdened, spending more than 30% of their incomes on housing. In 2024, in the Mid-Hudson region that includes Westchester, 37% are cost burdened, higher than any other region in the state except for New York City at 43%. Per the U.S. Census ACS survey, 5-year 2023, 38% of Westchester County households are renters, 53% of whom are cost burdened. In Yonkers, with the greatest number of the county's rent-stabilized units, renters comprise 53% of households, 54.4% of which are cost burdened, meaning they pay more than 30% of income on rent. In Mount Vernon, 58% of households rent, and 55% of them pay more than 30% of income on rent. 43% of New York households with someone over 75 suffers housing insecurity, much greater than the national rate of 34%. In the Mid-Hudson region, the rate is even higher at 45%. 37% of New York households with someone between 62 and 74 suffer housing insecurity, much greater than the national rate of 29%. In the Mid-Hudson region, the rate is 38%. The above data are equally alarming for veterans and people with disabilities. Did you know that some senior citizens and disabled individuals have lost their SCREE and DREE rent freezes because the $50,000 maximum income limit has not been raised since the limit was adopted in 2014? According to a report by the Westchester Children's Association, 82,451 households need affordable housing, and that housing prices exceed affordable levels in every community across Westchester. Our neighbors in the Hudson Valley have struggled for many years to persist through an ongoing crisis of housing affordability and availability. This year's National Low Income Housing Coalition data suggests that working tenants are struggling even more in 2024 as their wages have dipped and the cost of typical rents increased yet again. Our community and civic leaders must understand that our housing crisis is exacerbating a human crisis. Many of our neighbors are spending a greater portion of their income to live in the Hudson Valley as housing costs have far outpaced stagnant wages. There is ample evidence that people are strained by housing at every level of income. While the suffering is most acute for those who earn the least amount of money in our economy, even the core of our middle class is struggling to find an affordable place to live in our region. So says the foreword to the Hudson Valley Pattern for Progress 2024 Out of Reach Report. The ORR supports the WCA's claims and quantifies the growing rent and wage gap. Exhibit A. The rent gap table shows Westchester's monthly gap for a one-bedroom fair market rent, FMR, is $673 for affordable rent at the average renter wage and $1,091 for a two-bedroom apartment. The rent gap correlates with an annual wage gap of $26,925 for a one-bedroom FMR and $43,645 for a two-bedroom FMR. Based on these rates, if rent-stabilized tenants cannot work 61 through 75 hours per week to afford to pay their rent, the only other choice they have is to use more than 30% of their income to pay rent. Hence, that is why we have so many tenants who are rent burdened and severely rent burdened. These tables show a significant gap between rising housing costs and stagnant or low growing incomes for renters, which has important implications for their financial security and overall well-being. In 2023, In 2023, the federal poverty rate for a family of four with two children was $30,000. The Alice threshold for that same family to live in Westchester County was $107,472. See Exhibit B. Alice is a county-by-county calculation that measures key costs of living, such as housing, transportation, healthcare, food, and childcare. The huge difference between the poverty rate and Westchester Alice was a $77,472 deficit. Many rent-stabilized families' incomes fall in the chasm. Many of the workers below the Alice threshold are essential workers who perform the jobs that keep our economy running. They are the child care providers, food service workers, cashiers, personal care aides, delivery drivers, civil servants, and more. Many of these essential workers are rent-stabilized tenants. Today's rent-stabilized tenants are dealing with economic uncertainty and a significant housing deficit coupled with a critical affordability crisis. This triple threat has put renters at risk more than ever before. Families are struggling with unprecedented housing and food insecurity, while cities, towns, and villages are trying to deal with record levels of homelessness. I'm just taking a pause for a second because this I know to be true. My job, Monday through Friday, we have seen the lines increase on our food pantry, at least 14 families or more. And this has been every Wednesday over the last 9 weeks. Every Wednesday, I ask the team what's happening. Have more people come? And the answer is yes. We have someone that helps with housing, and her load is so overburdened that we have to raise more money to get her an assistant to help people with housing. So I'm just saying this, I know personally from my experience. So not just with data. No one should have to choose between their need for both food and shelter. As said in the testimony of Genevieve Roach before the board, housing is a basic human right. We understand the owner's argument of rising costs, feeling crushed, the need to make a profit, have retirement income, and/or bequeath property to the next generation. However, as acknowledged by more than half of the presenters, owners and renters are in this crisis together and must share the burden. Passing more than a minimal increase would devastate fixed income seniors and the disabled, as well as struggling low and medium income households. Many rent stabilized tenants are single individuals, not double income households. Passing an exorbitant rent increase will almost certainly cause more tenants to fall behind on paying rent, which will raise eviction rates and promote further homelessness. Based on statistics, research and analysis and testimony, Tamara and I suggest that the board pass 1% for 1-year lease renewals and 1.5% for 2-year lease renewals. The analysis on rent burden vulnerable populations, the housing shortage, and food insecurity clearly support low rent increases. With the minuscule funds a rent burdened family may have after paying rent, they will likely spend their remaining dollars on items many of us take for granted, such as food, toilet paper, feminine hygiene products, diapers, medication, bath soap, razors, shaving cream, laundry detergent, school supplies, or the cost of cleaning their clothing at a laundromat. Truly, just the barest of necessities. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. Questions for Ms. Hamer? From the board? I have a question. You mentioned that many rent stabilized tenants are single individuals, not double income households. Do you happen to know the percentage?
I don't, but I could actually probably get it and send it to Peter so he could send it to the board. I just see them on the lines that come to our food pantry. We serve over 1,500 families in our regular food pantry, and we have over 130 individuals on our kosher pantry. And most of them are single female head of households.
Ms. Santiago, you have a question?
Yes, on page 3, thank you for numbering the pages. First paragraph, did you know that some senior citizens and disabled individuals have lost their scree and rent freezes? So I just would like some more data on this if you can. I didn't know, what percentage have lost this benefit?
Okay.
I can speak to that. I don't have the exact percentage, but I participated on a Zoom call back in March that was aimed at discussing the problems with scree and dree. And currently, the state legislature is looking at some bills that have been offered to try to help the situation. Because on that Zoom call, I heard from seniors who had, when the threshold was initially raised to $50,000, they qualified, and so they had scree. But because of the cost of living increases that they've gotten in the 10 years since that time, they've gone from having it to losing it because, you know, $1 over and you lose your scree. So I know that there's at least a couple of the bills that have been proposed are trying to address that. One, by raising the threshold. Two, by allowing a certain period that if people lost it, that they can reapply and that they could get it back at the level that they were at. I can reach out to, I believe the organization is Tenants and Neighbors that sponsor that call and find out if they have more exact numbers of how many tenants. But this is actually currently an issue that's being discussed and lobbied for in the state legislature now that the budget has been approved.
And how does this impact, what's the situation for a tenant who loses their street? They have to now cover the entire fair market rent? Is that what happens?
For a tenant that has screen, which means that they're 62 or over, their income is $50,000 or less, and they pay a third or more of their income for rent. If they lose their scree, I know some cases where, let's say somebody's had scree for 10 years. The rent still goes up. The owner gets a tax credit. So the tenant doesn't pay the increase that we pass on this board. It gets credited to the owner by the municipality. So they get an additional tax credit. So they're not out of pocket with scree or DRE. But if you lose your scree, your rent goes up to whatever it's supposed to be if you didn't have it. So if you've had scree for 10 years, and in that period of time, your rent has gone up $100, then once you lose your scree, your rent for your lease renewal goes up to the level it's supposed to be without scree, because you've exceeded the income threshold, because you have to meet all 3 criteria to qualify for it. And that's why it's such a big problem for a lot of seniors who had been okay 10 years ago, but they're not okay now because of maybe those little cost of living increases that they've gotten through Social Security in the interim.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Yes, Mr. Wood.
Question, on page 2, says the board stated that you missed some statistics, about events.
Thank you, sorry. Insecurity, are these numbers specific to rent stabilized apartments or are they rent in general?
Such cost burden, meaning rent burden households. I actually had the handout was in a package that we got from Genevieve Roche, and I can actually give that to Peter.
Okay, thank you.
I don't believe it's specific to rent stabilization.
No, my question was, is these numbers
Mm-hmm.
specific to rent stabilized apartments? Because it doesn't say that. It says that Yonkers is, it does mention rent stabilized in it in regards to the city of Yonkers, but it doesn't state that they are all, that these statistics have to do with rent stabilized apartments.
Okay.
That's my question.
Okay. Some of them do, but I will get the handout and look at it again.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? No? In that case, gentlemen, have you agreed, who's going to, Mr. Figure, you're going to do your presentation?
Thank you.
need new glasses or new eyes.
Yes, I appreciate the font. I appreciate the large font.
Good evening, Madam Chairperson and members of the Rent Guidelines Board. Thank you for the opportunity to hear a presentation of the multifamily rent stabilized property owners. Of course, we know that the duties of our board are subject to and must conform to the terms of the Emergency Tenant Protection Act. I have attached a copy of the relevant sections of the law, Exhibit A. May I just point, I don't expect anybody to read the exhibits, but they're here for you after my talk. You can look at each of the exhibits and I'll reference to what they refer to. May I just point out one section of the legislative findings that quote, "The ultimate objective of state policy is the transition from regulation to a normal market of free bargaining between landlord and tenant." That's in Exhibit B. The ultimate goal should be to preserve housing stock for this transition. I suggest to those who have not read that you review it, and I have next a copy of the relevant sections to my presentation. Going to the law, I would like to deal generally with the factors set forth in the law, legal, non-emotional issues, Exhibit C. I would like to add that although we all understand that we want to prevent speculative and unjustified rent increase, as the law states, we have an obligation to view this statutory goal in line with the factors that the legislature states that we shall and must consider. First, the law advises us to look at the economic condition of the residential real estate industry in the affected area, including such factors as the prevailing and projected real estate taxes, sewer, and water rates, among other things. As to the economic condition of the residential real estate industry, I refer you to the undisputed fact that rent-regulated housing units in Westchester in under 15 years has decreased about 40%, from 50,000 regulated units to under 30,000. This is a major reduction in affordable housing in our county, and we must think of the reasons. We should not be responsible for further decline due to discouraging investment in affordable housing. Note that ETPA's artificial limitation is a drag on the maintenance of existing housing. Keep rents artificially low and you'll have less and less affordable housing for anyone. Moreover, the condition of the housing will deteriorate without reasonable rent adjustments to allow a landlord to not only keep pace with the cost of living, but with the increase in expenses. And to answer one who might comment that income has also increased, it can no longer increase due to the lack of vacancy increases, and there are many less major capital improvements and IAIs. I would also like to make a comment about the so-called quote profit, end quote, that we hear as a 40%, 20%, 25%, 17%, or some other such figure. That quote profit is a misnomer. It is a cash flow figure that does not take into account, among other things, payment of principal, amortization, which is the cost of people buying property, capital expenditures, and MCIs, etc. I refer you to Professor DeResta's presentation, which is a detailed presentation of the economics of the industry. If we want people to invest in and improve affordable housing, we have to allow them to not only stay even, but to make a profit. Relative to real estate taxes, those rates have universally increased yearly in Westchester's ETPA communities. And while the ETPA property owner pays these expenses, the single-family homeowner bears the burden of lower multifamily property values. This is because of the certiorari laws, which allow tax assessment reduction in controlled housing and result in single-family homeowners paying more. Every property owner in every ETPA community pays more real estate taxes because of the limitation of rentals in ETPA buildings. We ask that the public members of this board consider the interests of the single-family homeowner public, which probably comprises a major portion of the Westchester County population. Secondly, we are to consider gross operating maintenance costs, including insurance, repairs, and labor. As to insurance costs went up over 30%, although you heard testimony that some costs increased over 50% to 200%. Moreover, there is a hidden cost, that of deductible increasing. As to labor, the attorney advised us that the union contract provides increases of over 3% yearly. We have heard from the tenants, and they do not disagree with the landlord's expenses, but they argue anecdotally about affordability. It is noted that at no place in the law is affordability mentioned. While the law does talk about such other data as may be available to our board, the relevant qualification is that data is required, not anecdotal information. The data is what is required through the surveys or other publications, such as the CPI index or statutory authority. One data noted by a witness was Social Security, but Social Security has increased significantly yearly, and we have an exhibit to that effect. Relative to the minimal guideline increases, which have not kept up with inflation and the cost of living, you can see the chart provided by Mr. Nelson, Exhibit D. The minimal increases given by this board is self-defeating. If you want the number of ETPA units to go down to 0, keep penalizing the ETPA property owners. If you want more affordable housing, then you must at least provide people with an incentive to purchase, rehabilitate, and construct affordable housing. As you've heard from one witness, why invest your savings in affordable rent-controlled housing when you can get 4 to 5% with government treasury bills at no risk? I attached today's rates showing they're between 4 and 5% for treasury bills. Moreover, since the Housing Stability and Tenant Protection Act of 2019, known also as the HSTPA, the ability of property owners to subsidize the low guideline increases with individual apartment increases or the vacancy increases have virtually disappeared. Formerly, there was a 20% plus vacancy allowance increase, which did not hurt or affect any existing tenant. That is gone. Next, major capital improvement applications have gone down from the 50 to 60 a year in Westchester to 9 in 2023. The return on MCIs is only 2%. Individual IAIs increases are virtually non-existent, and you heard that landlords keep apartments vacant because they cannot afford to renovate them and get a reasonable rent. Property conditions are declining because property owners can't afford major improvements and are adopting Band-Aid approaches, and they need your increases to do even that. The law is that with regard to the factors that our board shall consider, and I emphasize the word shall, since in legal terms, as DHCR's counsel can advise you, the word is a mandate, a requirement, not an option. The board must also consider the following: the economic condition of the residential real estate in the affected area, including such factors as prevailing and projected real estate taxes, sewer and water rents, gross operating maintenance costs, including insurance rates, government fees, cost of fuel, and labor costs. Cost and availability of financing, including effective rates of interest, overall supply of housing accommodations, and overall vacancy rates, the relevant data from the current and projected cost of living indices from the affected area, and such other data may be made available before it. And note that we talked about data again. And the law, I have attached a copy of the law. Now, as to the last section, such other data, it refers to data, an objective term, not speculative or anecdotal statements as to the ability to afford, etc. Again, affordability is not a factor set forth in the statute. Thus, while the statements by many people as to their respective fears of a rent increase certainly gain our sympathy, there was no empirical data, since HCR does not survey as to income, and none as to affordability, nor is there an issue that we can legally consider. It is noteworthy that although we heard repeatedly that certain percentages of the population pay more than a third of their income as rent, we did not hear that the percentages were in controlled housing, nor did we hear about those who use the ETPA subsidies in the form of rent control to have fancy Vermont houses and multiple cars. Thus, affordability is not an issue for this board and is not a criteria set forth in the law. Last year, we heard from the testimony of Antoinette Rose, a local 1199 representative, who received 3 wage increases in 3 years of 7%, 6%, and 5%. And when asked why the increase, she candidly admitted that costs and expenses have increased. So presumably, she needs the extra income. Well, the same goes for the property owners of rent-limited ETPA housing. Let's look at the numbers from Table 3. Insurance is up 17.5% last year, 15% this year, over 32%, and that is compounded. As I said, many witnesses testified about 50 to 200% increases in insurance and cutting down off the coverage. Utilities are up 7.2%. Real estate taxes, which are 15% of expenses, 18% of expenses, went up 2.7% over 3.4% last year. Again, compounded amount of over 6% in 2 years. And that's the largest sum that all landlords pay, is real estate taxes. And what's gone down? MCIs. So ETPA buildings are deteriorating. Repairs are down 0.2%, even though more repairs are needed because there are less major capital expenditures. And interest rates have increased 3.6%. As to interest rates, testimony was repeatedly presented that payments on loans have increased more than 50%, and there are those who could refinance only did so for shorter periods of time, and that presumes the property owner can even get a sufficient amount to refinance. Regarding depreciation, you heard from a witness testify that that is a real expense, and that cannot be included in repairs, as only 1/27 could be deducted in each year. In effect, depreciation is the establishment of a reserve fund for expenses such as this. But the witnesses testified that they do not have enough income to establish a reserve fund. The cost to income ratio remains high, and although the tenant representatives claim that the ratio means, quote, profit, that of course is nonsense. First of all, it does not include capital expenditures that are not included in repairs. And whatever capital is expended, as we stated, is 1/27 with a 27-year payout, although 100% of the cash is laid out now. Further, the amortization of a property cost is not included. And finally, what about a fair return to the property owner? Even the tenant's own witnesses admitted that a fair return to the property owner is called for. If we as a board continue with the minuscule rent increases, as in the last few years, the amount of affordable available housing will decrease even more. Just look at the HCR chart. In 2020, there were 29,438 rent stabilized units. In 2024, there were 28,721, a decrease of over 700 affordable apartments. And that is a number from the registrations. We do not know how many vacant apartments there are, which will increase with the effects of HSTPA. Again, why invest in real estate if you get a better return with no risk with treasury bills? You have to provide the property owner with a living increase. As Professor DeResta pointed out, ETPA properties generate insufficient income given the inflation rate and the fact that many of these properties have subsidies from market rate apartments. Ken Nilsson testified to data, not hypothetical, but real numbers. From 2016 to 2025, the CPI increased 31%, yet the cumulative guideline increase for 1 year was only 10.75%, a shortfall of over 20%, and 17.25% for 2-year leases, a shortfall of almost 14%. As to real estate taxes, Yonkers had a 5.45 increase last year and a 2.85 increase this year, with a cumulative compounded increase in real estate taxes over 8%. Mount Vernon taxes are increasing 3.5%. 2 legislators testified that the board should grant an increase of 2%. However, just look at the increase for 1 year since 2016. 0, 1%, 2%, 1.75%, 0, 0.5, 2%, 1%, and 2.5%. That is why there is an affordable housing crisis. Again, if you want property owners who care about their properties to keep investing and keep their properties up, a fair and reasonable increase is necessary. Listen to the property owners who care about their properties and their tenants. The young lady who was a property owner of a small family owned property in Yonkers told us about her inability to get an MCI. Moreover, she said she and others, as Alana Cifatelli, who are hands-on owners, have second jobs to do the work in the building themselves. These and others like them can only stay out of bankruptcy by working hands-on. This is not unusual, but with no MCIs, no more vacancies, and virtually no IAIs, and without a reasonable increase from the board, it will be virtually impossible for these property owners to stay in business. And the large property owners are in no better position. Listen to the landlords. They're hurting and are in a crisis stage. The longer the increases do not even keep up with the cost of inflation, the more the rent-stabilized multifamily apartments will deteriorate. As said by one landlord after another, they're looking to you for relief. The issues before this board transcend the individual property owners and their tenants. I do not have to advise the public members of this board as to the significant burden and responsibility you have. The very existence of housing in Westchester rests with you. Another zero or minimal increase will just exacerbate the housing crisis and end up further reducing the number of ETPA apartments. As I've stated previously, the housing situation cannot be put on the backs of the property owners, as the tenants seek to do. This is society's problem. It's society's problem, and one that government has to deal with, and not restrict property owners' ability to earn a reasonable return. We point out to this board that the fair market value of apartments in Westchester set by the government is significantly greater than the average net rent received. That's Exhibit F in your package for me. If you divide the total income with the number of units, which actually also include free market apartments, you get $1,527 per unit, which includes 1, 2, 3, and 4 bedroom apartments. The lowest fair market rent for a Yonkers zip code, which is the lowest in Westchester, pretty much, is $1,940 to $3,000. That is data, and that shows how far under a reasonable rent that the landlords in Westchester are getting. I have a little bit more and I'll be done. 2 things. Very noteworthy, the New York State legislature has spoken to what it deems a reasonable rent increase. the state and several communities have passed what is euphemistically called the good cause eviction law. Putting aside other aspects, the legislature and governor approved rent increases of 10% or 5% plus the cost of living, 3.9% recently, whichever is lower, or a minimum now, a total of 8.9% rent increase. The legislator who testified stated that she was in favor of the good cause legislation, and that rate of increase for rent is part of it. Therefore, we have a guideline from the state as to a reasonable rent increase, and we believe that in light of the dire necessity and requirements presented to you by the multifamily property owners, that this board should at a minimum use that as a guide. Well, again, I do not believe that affordability is a factor. We have heard testimonies to Social Security. In the last 4 years, the increase in Social Security has been 5.9, 8.7, 3.2, and 2.5%. A cumulative increase of over 20%, way over what this board has given. Thus, there has been an average of 5% a year. However, the last 4 guideline increases for 1 year increases have been 0, half, 2, 1, 2.5, a total of 6%, a shortfall of 14% under the cost of living. It is also imposed, the increased cost of living is also imposed on the property owner. Virtually all other segments of society are free of controls and can raise the prices, but not ETPA property owners. We all have this burden, yet the landlord by statute cannot freely raise the rent for controlled tenants. If you want more housing, you have to provide economic incentives for people to get or stay involved in property ownership. We must finally remember that the limitations on landlords' income impacts dramatically on the tax assessments, as we've said. I ask the public members to consider that impact on the public. And I have attached also a recent publication from a citizens economic group. That's the last exhibit on my package. In order to assure that the additional costs incurred by the landlord in utilities, labor, real estate taxes, etc., all of which are mandated and have no flexibility, do not come out of maintenance and repairs, an increase is necessary to equalize the increase in expenses and cost of living. To just keep pace, we submit that the good cause formula adopted by the state legislature is an increase that would only start to put the multifamily property owners back even with where they would have been had the board given increases commensurate with the increased expenses and cost of living in the last years. Thank you for listening to me. I'm sorry I went over a few minutes.
Okay, thank you. Questions for Mr. Finger?
Okay, thank you. I ask that you read the attachments.
Thank you. Hearing none, I assume that this meeting is concluded. Do I hear a motion to adjourn? Second? Second. Thank you. The meeting is adjourned.